3 weeks after their last run, the Ashen Grace came shouldering into Velvenreach like a seasoned brawler minding her elbows in a hall of glass, chin down, eyes up, every line humming with purpose. They rode high and empty, as they always did on the northbound leg, and the harbour clerks merely scratched their arrival into the ledger as the key bells tolled the second hour past noon. Work done, the ship exhaled, ropes eased, planks creaked, and 100 small sounds settled back into the harbour's measured music. "Could have been kinder on my heart back by Copper Bell," Gideon said, rolling a sore shoulder as they stepped off the gangplank together. "I like it beating inside my ribs." Tarrant snorted, tapping the rolled chart under his arm. "Wasn't my fault the buoy's 30 yards off station. The chart's right. The sea's wrong." "The sea," Vash said dryly, "doesn't read your charts." Althea's mouth twitched, almost a smile. "The sea also doesn't care for excuses." Gideon elbowed Tarrant. "Tell that to the Turn Whisperer." He jerked his chin back towards Silas, who walked a pace behind them, quiet as tide water. "If he hadn't called it, we'd be picking barnacles out of our teeth." Silas kept his eyes on the ivory planks. "The birds lifted wrong," he murmured. "Wind said one thing, water answered another." "See?" Gideon spread his hands. "Turn Whisperer." "Next time," Althea said, the thread of humour pulled taut into command. "We trust the lid line over a painted bell and keep 2 eyes for drift. Copper Bell wanders whenever the tidal gate drags her chain, and we do not feed my ship to a sandbar because someone thinks a buoy is a law." "Aye, Captain," they said together, nearly in unison, which drew the ghost of that almost smile back to her face. Velvenreach's harbours lay clean and bright. Alabaster steps descended to jade-green water, living wood arbours cast latticed shade, moon crystal chandeliers hung from copper filigree and made cold fire even in daylight. Eldorian porters moved spell-warded crates with gloved care while meridian factors barked schedules beneath polite bells and the faint perfume of resin and tea. They turned toward the Lantern and Ivy by habit. The tavern tucked beneath a terrace of living oak, lanterns breathing steady light against carved stone and hanging ferns. The walkway between here and there was a parade of familiar faces and genteel dangers, both of which the crew took in with equal care. But halfway along the arcade, the noise changed. Not louder exactly, sharper. A knot of voices gathered like storm birds. The crowd moved in a way that didn't match coin or fight. It leaned, it craned, it listened. "What's all that?" Gideon asked, standing on his toes. "A pilot skiff out of the tidal gate brought someone in," said a harbour runner they knew, Arl with the ink-stained cuffs, trotting past with a satchel. "Found him clinging to a hatch, half drowned and all tore up." "Drunk or unlucky?" Tarrant said. Arl shook her head once. "Not drunk, marked. The kind of marks the sea doesn't make." That pulled Althea's gaze tight. "Where?" "Lantern and Ivy," Arl answered, ink-stained cuff jerking toward the arcade. "Moraine's got him inside, away from the wind." They moved with purpose now, banter trimmed to silence. Vash kept beside Althea as the press thickened, the inlaid stone underfoot gone slick with sea damp, and the drift from fern-hung eaves. Another regular, Lysa, the fishwife with arms like rope and a laugh that could cut a man, caught Gideon's sleeve. "You hear it?" she asked, eyes bright with the relish of a tale and the dread that makes it worth telling. "Says he sailed east of the Teeth, and the fog stood up and walked. Stood up, mind you." "Fog walks for poets," Gideon said, but softly. "Then a light where no light should be," Lysa went on, ignoring him. "He swears it flashed the Haven's call and then everything went quiet, like a prayer with the breath sucked out." Tarrant's steps faltered. "Tidewatch?" he said too quickly. "That's the name," he choked up. "Aye," Lysa said, and he near coughed his soul saying it. Althea's face changed. Not a hardening so much as a narrowing. All the warmth of the pier bled to a sharpened edge. The mention of Tidewatch Haven cut through her like the clean cold of drawn steel. She didn't quicken to a run, but the space seemed to fold for her all the same. People moved aside at the angle of her shoulders and the certainty in her stride. "Make way," Vash called ahead, not loud, just sure. "Captain coming through." They slipped into the churn of bodies, sailors smelling of tar and salt, a harbour scribe with ink still wet on his cuffs, two sky riggers in threadbare coats, until the lantern and ivy rose before them, moon crystal fixtures casting cool pools of light beneath carved beams and living wood. The usual song at the hearth had collapsed into murmurs. The commotion wasn't a brawl, it was a tide pressed toward a single rock. Moraine, the proprietor, kept her post by the door like a quiet sentinel at a breach. When she saw Althea, something respectful crossed her face, and she lifted the silk rope strung as a makeshift barrier. "Captain," she said, "you look like a woman who'll keep order if I let her in." "I will," she said simply. "Then do." Moraine flicked her eyes toward the back. "He's on the long bench by the hearth. Blankets, shaking. Says he's the last of the Windshear." Arrol had been right, the kind of marks the sea doesn't make. Even from the doorway, Vash could see the strange soot that cindered the survivor's coat at the seams and the raw edge of an ear torn not by rope or splinter, but by something that cut quiet. The man's hands worked one another as if trying to wring the cold out of his bones. Behind them, Silas drifted a touch, gaze fixed past the crowd, as though he were hearing a sound no one else had noticed. The tavern's cool light threw uneasy shadows, and for a blink his own lagged a fraction behind the turn of his shoulder before catching up. He blinked, swallowed, and moved when Vash nudged him. Taran leaned close to Vash as they threaded inside. "Tidewatch," he whispered, breath barely a shape. "Why would a courier run to Tidewatch?" "Ask him after she does," Vash said, eyes on Althea. Althea lifted a hand, and the four of them formed a quiet wedge at her back, the crew's discipline reasserting itself like a sail drawing wind. She didn't shove. She didn't need to. The regulars knew the cut of her command, and, more than that, the debt they owed the ships that kept Velvenreach's oath to the Meridian front. Men and women parted enough for her to pass. Moraine's voice followed at their heels. "He calls himself Bram Tallows, says he kept the galley, mouthful of seawater and ghosts." Althea didn't slow. If the name Tidewatch Haven had been a stone thrown into the still pool of her features, the ripples had already smoothed to obsidian calm. Only Vash, close enough to catch the details nobody else would, saw the flicker at her jaw when Moraine said galley, a calculation starting, pieces finding their places. "Give him broth," she said over her shoulder, low but carrying, "and clear those nearest tables. He talks, we listen." The crowd obeyed as if the order had been theirs to follow all along. Benches scraped, cups lifted out of the way. The murmurs didn't stop, but they thinned into a hush of expectancy. As they drew within arm's reach of the man on the long bench, the smell reached them. Salt and tar, yes, but beneath it a bitter tang like iron left to winter in the mouth. Bram's eyes were rimmed raw from brine and fear. When he looked up, his gaze snagged on Althea's sabre at her hip, then climbed to her face and steadied as if he'd found a mark he could aim his story at without shaking apart. Althea took a knee so they were level, every inch of her now the captain who had claimed a crew and a promise out of ash. "Bram Tallows," she said, voice even. "I'm Althea Veil of the Ashen Grace. You're safe. Start at the beginning." Outside, the harbour kept its measured music. Inside, the lantern and ivy leaned closer to hear. Gideon's grin thinned. Taran's fingers began mapping bearings on wood. Silas turned his face north. Up close, the man's skin held the grey of brine bite. A line of dried blood tracked from the torn curve of his right ear. The blanket around his shoulders steamed faintly where the hearth's heat met soaked wool. "Moraine says you kept the galley," Althea said, her tone even, precise, the kind that left little room for embellishment. Bram nodded once, a motion both confirmation and surrender. "Aye. The galley was mine." "Ship?" "The Windshear," he answered, voice rough but steadier. "Starwake Key Run." "Rank?" "Cook," he said simply. Then, with the ghost of a wry grimace, "Or what passed for one." I kept the fire lit, salted the pork, and tried not to kill the crew by accident. Althea's gaze lingered on him, weighing something deeper than rank. "And yet you heard things." He gave a shallow nod. "Men talk when their mouths are full. You learn what matters between bites." "Then start there," she said, the authority in her voice as quiet as it was immovable. "What you heard. Then what you saw." Bram's hands worried the rim of the cup. "We're Starwake Key men, the Windshear. Frontline runs, blades and bread to the west bastions. But a fortnight past, a runner comes aboard with a sealed packet, meridian wax, and a stamp I have seen only once, on crates that move off the ledger." He lifted his eyes to Althea's sabre, then higher. "Your Caspian seal. The order said we were to break from the line and put north at once. No escorts, no heraldry, no gossip. Tidewatch Haven." The name took a breath from the tables nearest them. Althea's face did not move, save the slightest narrowing of attention like light brought to a point. "We sailed that same hour," Bram went on. 7 days straight, no harbour, no priest for the watch. Just wind and bread and the smell of ropes never dry. The north of north, where the northern Meridian Sea butts its head against the Elmirian and neither wants to give way. Currents there don't run, they argue, and when they argue the water lies. Your compass ticks and then thinks better of it. The sky throws 2 storms and makes you pick the real one. Taran breathed out through his nose. "Corsair waters," he said softly. "Not theirs by charter," Bram muttered, "but theirs by habit." Tidewatch sits like a broken tooth along that line. Abandoned piers and the ones not abandoned wish they were. You see village smokesome dawns, thin and careful, and by dusk it's gone as if the day imagined it. Wrecks everywhere. Fresh ones shine and old ones mutter. The haven's beacon shutters when it feels like it. Place is cursed. He shuddered, and the blanket sighed against him. "We skirted the spit and dropped anchor under the lee of a cliff that looks like a finger pointing men to judgment. Should have turned back then." "What was the mission?" Vash asked. Bram shook his head. "Orders didn't say, quartermaster wouldn't say, but the talk at mess ran hot. Old Thale, our bosun, swore it was a storm eye, a bit of swirling weather, a mage pinned to a frame. The gunner said witch egg, hard as stone and humming like a hive. Marnan from the longboat thought it was something Eldorian, sunblind sigil maybe, meant for the fleets to taste wind with. Me, I thought it was none of my business, and I salted the pork and kept the fire even." "And Tidewatch?" Gideon asked. "You dealt with them." Bram's mouth twisted, a reflex halfway to a curse. "Dealt with what was left of it, stones and ghosts mostly." He drew in a breath that didn't quite settle. "We spent weeks crawling that coast, down among weed-strangled pilings that belonged to piers older than charts remember, up brackish channels that felt too narrow for time to pass through. Water there was wrong. Black, like oil. Still, like waiting." His voice dropped a measure. "We lost men, first to slips and snags, then to something worse. Jace walked into a cave mouth humming and never came out. Nerin screamed himself hoarse at shadows he said were whispering his name, cut his own lines and tried to swim back to the ship. Never found his boots, found his teeth." A silence pulsed through the listening crew. "We took soundings till the sea rang hollow. Some nights the fog climbed the rigging like it was listening. Wind blew against itself. Echoes didn't come back right. Quartermaster kept ordering deeper runs. Said the target was buried, not adrift. Wouldn't say what." He rubbed a thumb along his jaw. "Then one dawn, the longboat came back with half its crew, silent as coffins. They carried a crate, iron-banded, lead-wrapped, big as a bread oven and twice as heavy. 2 men had to brace it just to keep it from warping the deck. "What was in it?" Althea asked, her voice careful. "Didn't say," Bram muttered. "Didn't ask, just knew it was it. You could feel it. Heat on the skin, even when the crate was cold, like it was breathing slow and low. We lashed it fore of the mainmast, and the compass started spinning like a drunk. That's when the quartermaster posted guards, armed, no sleep shifts, no chatter, and he gave the order, sail quiet." "Any markings?" Vash asked. Bram nodded slowly. Sun-stamped blind, like the light had been scraped out of it, and a knot mark I'd seen before. "Cargo board stamped for your uncle's hands, Captain. That's when I knew we weren't just ferrying secrets. We were holding something that didn't want to be held." "And then?" Althea prompted. Bram's stare came back, and with it a tremor. "Then the sea forgot to make noise." Silas's eyes lifted at that, a small shared flinch no one else noticed. "No bell," Bram whispered. "No gull. Even the pan I was holding stopped ringing like it wanted to be polite." He swallowed, and his fingers made small, helpless shapes in the air. "I was in the galley, measuring flour, cursing a weevil I named Marnan out of spite. I thought the fire had gone out. The light in the oil went thin. Then the ship stepped. Not a strike like a wave, down, hard, like someone grabbed her by the throat and pushed. Crockery went silent into the air, and then fell loud. Men started to shout, too late, not a proper all hands, just the noise men make when they're already losing. "Ambush," Vash said. Bram nodded too fast. Out of fog that wasn't there and then was, not rolling, climbing. I ran to the ladder, and when I put my hand on the rail, the wood under my palm felt colder than iron in deep winter. That's wrong. In a ship at speed. Then the hull rang. Not like iron shot. More the way a bell rings when you've put a thumb to it. My teeth hurt. Someone yelled that the fore shrouds were gone. Another voice said the lanterns were sick. "Did you see them?" Althea asked. "Not clear," Bram murmured, eyes narrowing as if squinting through fog that still lived behind his lids. "Shapes, slick with rain or oil. Too fast for reavers, too clean for pirates. Reavers make a feast of the noise. These things didn't celebrate, they executed, on time, on purpose." His fingers tensed around the cup. Something struck starboard twice, hard enough to lift the galley floor. I thought grapnels, but by the time I got topside, whatever had bitten into us wasn't holding, it was tearing. The rail was cracked where the wards used to shine. All the sigils were dead. Not broken, gone. Like something scraped them off with a shadow. He grimaced. The air smelled wrong. Like soot that forgot how to burn. Water that's been angry too long. Taryn's glance slid toward Althea, but her face stayed still, watching, listening, assessing. "They didn't try to board," Bram went on, voice low and dry now, like silt shifting on the seafloor. "Didn't try to capture. They came to end us. Rigging went with the first blast, chain shot wide as a cookpot. Next came the rudder, the keel." He shook his head. Felt like it tried to fold in half. He breathed once, shallow. No flare, no trumpet, not even a curse, just impact. Like the sea had made up its mind and decided we were done. Somebody tried the stern swivel. Got one round out before the fog swallowed it. Gun choked like it was breathing smoke. After that, just the sound of us breaking. "And the cargo?" Gideon asked. "How did it go over?" Bram's eyes closed, not in reflection but recoil. There was no flame, just force, from below. He tapped his chest once, hollow. Like the sea exhaled hard and tried to crush the hull flat. I couldn't breathe. The deck rose up like it was done being stepped on and threw half the galley against the beams. His voice dropped, roughened. I didn't see it go, couldn't. The smoke was thick as pitch and the ship was bucking like she wanted off the ocean, screams all around, but distant, like the air had turned its ears inside out. I was crawling, just trying not to drown in the smoke. The deck kicked again and something big, heavy, tore loose. I heard it, not saw it. Metal on wood, then nothing, no splash, just gone. He opened his eyes. No weight should vanish like that. Not quietly, not clean. The table hushed like it had drawn a breath and held it. "Did anyone see a flag?" Vash asked, low but firm. Bram shook his head, slow. Fog took the colours first, then the outlines. Maybe there was a pennant, black and quartered, I think. Could have been the smoke playing tricks. Reavers don't carry cloth, pirates do. But these weren't dockside scum. He stared down into his cup like it held an answer. They moved like they'd rehearsed it. Like a rite. Too exact to be hunger. Too fast to be mercy. We were dead before we even earned fear. His hand brushed his torn ear absently. I didn't survive. I just wasn't finished. Althea let a breath out. And you? I woke on a hatch lid with the sun trying to forgive me, he said simply. A pilot skiff out of the tidal gate took pity. They put me ashore and I walked until the lantern and Ivy's lamps were louder than the sea. He leaned forward, hands sudden and pleading, the cup forgotten. Captain Veil, Althea. If you're his blood, you know what this means. Caspian sent us. The quartermaster kept the packet in his coat and I saw the seal when he thought no one was looking. Whatever that crate was, and I don't want to know, it matters. Not for coin, for the line, for Starwake, for Cindermore, for men who don't have time to drown properly. His voice cracked, made raw again by the memory he'd just set down between them like a wet rope. Please, go north, find it, pull it up out of the black before the men who pushed it down come back for a second try. Althea rose, the motion smooth, the command in her bearing settling over the room like a sheet shaken clean. If it can be found, she said, we'll find it. Bram nodded, his breath coming easier for the first time. There's a mark to steer by, he offered, eager now, the way men clutch hope. West of a spit they call the Widow's Tongue, 2 hours southeast of the last lantern, if the lantern's lit, and it won't be if it's feeling spiteful. We set a buoy, plain, unpainted, might still be riding if the currents haven't chewed it down. He sagged back, spent. Around them, the lantern and Ivy remembered how to murmur. Silas, without meaning to, had turned his head north, toward a line of sea he could not see. In his mouth, a thin taste of iron bloomed and faded with the swing of the lanterns. Althea rose from her crouch, fluid and measured, as though even standing was part of a decision already made. He stays here, she told Moran. A week, at least. I'll cover the room and whatever else he needs. Moran nodded once, the kind of nod that understood debt and danger both. Althea turned to Taran. Sit with him. Chart the wreck, every detail. Shoreline, drift, depth, anything that might narrow the reach. I want bearings before the tide's up. Taran was already unrolling parchment, his fingers twitching toward the ink as though the maps were drawing themselves. Then to her crew, the words they'd been waiting for since the sea first whispered of a storm. We sail with the dawn.